if I get a question the most, if my friends ask me a question, is always how did I do this molding and is it removable? Because as you guys know, I'm a renter and I've been a renter for the last 8 years and I have never gotten into trouble with my landlord, okay? Because I don't do permanent damage. So it took me a couple of months to figure out how to do French molding in a way that was renter friendly. And renter friendly not only means that it needs to be no physical damage, right, in the wall. Renter friendly is also on a budget. Renter friendly is also with no power tools. And renter friendly is also easy for beginners. I finally figured out a formula, a way to do all of this at the same time, and that the end result looks beautiful, as you can see. I mean, I think it looks beautiful, if you ask me, you know? So I'm gonna tell you all the steps, show you how I did it, and you're gonna see at the end of this video that it's not as complicated as you might think. So, first step, we need to go to a hardware store. No, that's not the first step. I know if you're like me, I spend most of my time in Sephora and at Lowe's, at the hardware store. You know, with most men thinking, what is this girl doing here? She must lost herself on her way to Sephora. But now, I love the hardware store. But before buying all the materials, because, you know, when I get hyper fixated on a project, I want to start it right away. But the first step is always the most boring. We have to measure first, girls. I know, so boring. And before measuring all over the wall, you have to determine, of course, in which wall you're gonna do the molding. In my case, I wanted to do a big statement on this wall right here in my living room, in the bathroom, and then upstairs in my bedroom, but more on that later. So I wanted to start here. Here was the big project, right? Before I start measuring, it's not only important to measure how long is the wall or how tall is the wall and how long and tall you're gonna make your molding, but also it's important to measure other places around your house, because I know that there is pre-made molding that they sell now, and I'm not a fan of it. You know, usually if my life is something is practical, I love a practical thing that is already made, but I do think that those pre-made moldings look kind of weird because they're not customizable to the space. They don't make sense in the space. And here's why. Because it needs to be proportionate, the wall molding, to the rest of your apartment, of your house. For example, in my case, when I started measuring, I decided that I was gonna measure also the window. How long is the window? This window, as you can see, is divided in two. So I was like, okay, maybe I should follow or mimic one of the molding at the same height as the window division. Or maybe I should also mimic how high I will go with my molding with how high the window is. And also, for example, I kept measuring around my house and I saw that the same dimensions of how tall the window was were also the same dimensions of how tall the mirror of the bathroom was installed on. So if you're an architect, you might be thinking, duh, Vanessa, but for a regular person like me, I realized that that's how molding looks beautiful, because even if you don't have a trained eye, your eye can see if things are proportionate to the space. So I would say that my biggest tip is not only to measure the wall for practical purposes, like to know how much molding are you gonna buy or how big your squares are gonna be, but also measure around your house and try to mimic things that are already in your house. Like, for example, in the bathroom, I mimic the dimensions of the mirror that was already installed. In here, I mimic the dimensions of the window and the divisions of that window, right? And I mimic it back into my molding design. So after you have taken all your measurements, if you're like me, I did a little drawing, a little sketch with all the dimensions, not only the dimensions that they were already in my apartment, but also the dimensions that I was thinking about doing, right? But you know, it remains flexible until you install it on the wall. So now that I have those possible dimensions, that I have those measurements, I can go to the hardware store. And I really like Lowe's, but you know, the Home Depot is great too. And in the molding section, you're gonna see that they have different types of wall molding. As I say, they have the pre-made molding that I'm not a fan of, but also they have strips of molding. And there's different materials that they're made of. Because I'm a renter and I'm on a budget and I need something lightweight, I decided to opt for PVC, I think it's called. It's way more lightweight than wood, is easier to install, is cheaper, and because it's more lightweight, it's also easier to cut. So I will not be needing power tools. Because I do not own this space, I prefer to use this lightweight material, and I swear it's just fine. You cannot really tell the difference once you paint it. I mean, I think. Of course, if you own the space, invest in wood. Wood is always the better option. But if you're a renter like me, don't feel bad if you just want to choose PVC. I have used it in the past and remove it without doing damage to the wall, and I use it, like I said, in my bathroom, in the living room, and in the bedroom, and it looks just fine. Another thing that you're gonna need is, of course, nails. I bought two types of nails, really small ones, and then other ones that were a little bit longer, and I ended up using the smaller ones. And honestly, I use 1 or 2 nails like per molding, and it holds it perfectly. And that will guarantee me also to do the less amount of damage to the wall possible, because it's just a tiny little hole, a tiny nail that like maybe I don't even need to fill up to after I remove the molding. I also use a miter box. It makes it very easy during the process of cutting, so I would totally recommend to just get a miter box. And don't worry if you don't have like, you know, a miter saw or like any power tools. Like, you really don't need it, I think. Or I didn't need it for this huge wall. Now that I have all my materials, I am gonna measure again before cutting. You know what, I am Venezuelan, so I would prefer to be cutting like al ojo por ciento, but I know that it's better to start cutting just one rectangle of your molding. That's what I do. I do like one rectangle to see if I'm happy with, and then I start cutting in series. I not only want to make sure that I'm not making mistakes, but I want to use the least amount of material as possible, because of course we are, as I said, on a budget. I think that at the end I might have spent like $80 in the molding of the whole house, I think, and that might be an exaggeration. I mean, molding, all the materials, plus the painting, so it was not that bad. Another doubt that might arise is, how do you know which corners to cut, right? Which direction you should cut the corners, because the molding will have an outer corner and an inner corner, and my measurements are always based on the outer corner, or at least that's how I find it easier for me. So how do I know which corner is out or in? Before cutting the whole piece of molding, I just draw it with a pencil to make sure that I'm not making mistakes, because I've been known to make those mistakes. You know, I've done a corner like on one side and then to the other, and when I'm gonna do the rectangle, I'm like, okay, it's not connecting. So, you know, it's easier to just draw it and then I just wipe it off with a microfiber cloth. You have to know yourself and know the mistakes that you're gonna make before to cut. To install it on the wall, I usually put the nail not completely in. I just put it enough so that it holds the molding, and then I see if it's in the right place, and then I nail it all the way through, because also in my particular case, my walls are not straight. So sometimes my measurements were correct, but the wall wasn't, so I had to adapt a little bit to the wall. The great thing about this way of installing the molding is that even if you make a mistake, the nails are so tiny, I can just take them off, move it away, and re-nail it. Like, it's not that hard. I know that some people use a nail gun, but I don't find the need to, you know, like these tiny nails are very easy to just nail onto the molding and then to the wall. If you're by yourself, that's a good tip. I would sometimes put the nail on the molding and then onto the wall. So that way, you know, the nail would help me during the installation because I didn't have an extra pair of hands with me. I also sand the corners sometimes because the PVC can get a little bit like rough and uneven when I cut it, so I just use sandpaper like from the dollar store to make sure that those corners are sharp. Okay, so once your beautiful molding is on the wall, that's the time that you can fill in the corners if you want, again with wood filling, or in my case with plaster of Paris. I wanted to give it a little texture there, and that's what I had, and I didn't want it to go back to the hardware store. And once it dries, I sometimes sand it to make sure that it's very smooth. I wipe the molding with a microfiber cloth to make sure that it's clean before I apply the painting. The painting, that it comes to preference, but in my case I prefer to use like a not matte, like a kind of like a shiny finish paint, so that the molding can really shine, because we're giving dimension, right, to the wall. Matte paint sometimes can make it like the dimension that you're giving it go away. So I prefer shiny paint, but you do whatever you want. Okay, so as you can see, it's not that hard, right? I mean, for me at least, it was not that hard. It's a little bit time consuming. It definitely took a couple of days. In my case, for example, because this is such a big wall, not trying to brag like this is a big wall, guys, okay? I live in a studio. The tall ceilings are the only thing that I have working for me, okay? But because it's such a big wall, is a little bit time consuming, and it was a little bit difficult for me, you know, a little bit challenging for my small height, I should say. And that definitely affected the budget, of course. Like I said, I used around $80, I think, in the molding for the bathroom, the living room wall, and the scraps. I used them for my bedroom. But I think it turned out great. I'm very proud of myself. And like I said, my Parisian friends have come here and said that it looks like Parisian walls that they grew up in. I'm sorry, I was very proud. Like when they came, I was kind of like afraid that my French friends would see it and be like, oh, c'est dégueulasse. But no, they were very proud of me. Or I have nice friends, maybe that's the real reason. My space is a loft, is an industrial looking loft, so it can be a little bit cold, like a cold white box. So I decided to put molding to make it a little bit more like home-like, you know, homey, and to give it a little bit of more like a European flair. I don't know, it's so hard to use words to describe interior decorating, but I do think that it adds something to the walls without having to paint them and doing the minimum amount of damage possible. I mean, if I was my landlord, I would be so proud of myself, because when I take them off, there's not even gonna be a hole to fill in. So I hope that you like this video. I definitely try to include everything that I could. I don't know any more tips to give you. I tried to be as thorough as I could, find a way that was renter friendly, budget friendly, easy to install, no power tools, and also easy to remove so that you don't get in trouble with your landlord, but that you can get your wall molding look for very, very cheap. And if you recreate this, definitely let me know. Send me the pictures. If you have any questions, also leave them down below. Tell me, Vanessa, you forgot to tell me this. And I will answer as best I can. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you on the next DIY, hopefully. Bye bye.